Dark footage from these horrific exorcisms was supposed to stay buried and never be seen nor heard, but I'm sharing their stories. The Anelise Michelle case. Now, this case is one of the most controversial cases in modern history. Anelise was a German woman born in 1952 who underwent 67 Catholic exorcism rites over a period of 9 months and during the year before her demise. She passed due to malnutrition, for which her parents and priests were convicted of negligent homicide. Now, she was actually diagnosed with epileptic psychosis and had a history of psychiatric treatment that proved ineffective. By the time that she was 20, she had become intolerant of various religious objects and began to hear voices. Her condition worsened despite medication, and she became despondent, also displaying other symptoms for which she took medication as well. Now, after taking psychiatric medications for 5 years that failed to actually improve her symptoms, Michelle and her family became convinced she was possessed by a demon. As a result, her family appealed to the Catholic Church for an exorcism. While rejected at first, 2 priests got permission from the local bishop in 1975. Now, the priests began performing exorcisms and the family stopped consulting doctors. They believed she was being possessed by 6 different demons, with one of them actually being Lucifer. Michelle stopped eating food as she thought starving herself would rid herself of the demons that had taken over her body, and passed away on July 1st, 1976 from malnutrition and exhaustion resulting from the neglect of her medical condition after the crazy excessive 67 exorcism sessions. Now, she weighed only 68 pounds and was only 23 years old. The entire process was filmed. The footage is chilling. Anelise sits quietly before letting out a sudden blood-curdling scream and vomiting a thick black substance. Her face appears to morph, her eyes losing their whites entirely. At one point, a mirror in the room shatters on its own, cutting her cheek, and she laughs, smearing the liquid across her face, whispering, "Now I am whole." The audio you can listen to yourself. It's quite scary. You can't make out everything she says. It's really hard to dissect it, but it's worth listening to if it's piqued your interest. Now, the church immediately confiscated the tapes, of course. A local reporter claimed to have seen a copy and described a section where Anelise speaks in a deceased relative's voice, complete with matching tone and cadence. Now, that journalist disappeared 3 months later. The footage remains locked in a church vault in Madrid with no known copies confirmed to exist, though many claim to have seen snippets in lost VHS tapes passed around in the 90s. The case, of course, sparked controversy and highlighted the need for careful consideration when dealing with cases of apparent demonic possession, particularly when a medical diagnosis exists. The 1973 Tanaku exorcism tapes. Now, in the secluded village of Tanaku, Romania, a 23-year-old woman named Marcia Irina Cornisi arrived at the Tanaku monastery in 2005, actually seeking peace. Now, diagnosed with schizophrenia, she was placed under the care of a small group of nuns and a priest named Daniel Pedro Cornago. So, over time, they actually began to believe that she was possessed. What followed was a brutal exorcism that lasted days. Now, Father Cornaju, he basically thought that it was not just a mental illness, but rather that Cornisi was possessed by Satan. He would later claim that you can't take the devil out of people with pills and that an exorcism was necessary. In order to restrain her from violent movements, including those causing her to hit herself, the nuns bound her hands and feet and locked her in her room as they participated in the exorcism, basically commemorating the ascension of Jesus. Now, a few days later, they chained her to a cross with her arms stretched and carried her into the church so that they could anoint her. Now, according to Sister Nicoletta, Cornisi had been restrained in the same manner that others who were demonically possessed were. Sister Nicoletta stated that, had Cornisi not been restrained, she could have either unalived herself or unalived someone else. Now, with regard to Cornisi, Sister Nicoletta also stated that Irina knew that she was possessed by evil spirits because she was begging us to tie her up and help her. Her wrists and forehead were then anointed with holy oil, and she was kept in the church for 3 days. They put a towel into her mouth to stop her from cursing and prayed to cast out the devil as they wet her lips with holy water. Footage surfaced, never meant to be released, captured by a journalist who infiltrated the monastery. It shows Cornisi strapped to a makeshift crucifix, her mouth gagged, and her body convulsing violently. She screams not in words, but in very animalistic animalistic growls that echo off the monastery walls. Her final hours were spent without food and water, and she ultimately passed of dehydration and exhaustion. Now, Romanian authorities buried the footage, citing national disgrace, but fragments leaked years later on underground forums showing glimpses of her final hours. Shocking and raw, her eyes wild with either illness or something far worse. This case was widely publicized in the Romanian media, and following a lengthy trial, the priest was sentenced on appeal to 7 years, one nun to 6 years and the other 3 nuns to 5 years. However, many of the residents there, including Cronisti's brother, believed her to have suffered from demonic possession. The coroner maintained that the nun's cause of passing was actually due to an overdose of adrenaline given in the ambulance. Louis' exorcism. In the 1940s, a former priest from Missouri attempted to perform a clandestine exorcism in the basement of a private residence in St. Louis. The subject was a teenage boy who reportedly displayed erratic behavior, including writing in Latin despite never studying it, and exhibiting knowledge of private family details he couldn't have known. The St. Louis exorcism, a real-life event that reportedly inspired William Peter Blatty's novel The Exorcist, occurred in 1949 in St. Louis, Missouri, involving the boy Robbie Hunkler, now who allegedly exhibited signs of demonic possession. The event involved multiple exorcisms, including, one at the Alexandrian Brothers Hospital. Robbie Hunkler and his mother actually moved to St. Louis, where they stayed with relatives in Belle Noire. The boy reportedly began exhibiting strange behaviors, including physical manifestations and speaking in a very deep, guttural voice. The family contacted a priest at St. Louis University, who in turn contacted Father William Bowdern, an associate of the university's spiritual center. Bowdern, with permission from the St. Louis Archbishop, performed a series of exorcism rituals. Now, the rituals took place at the boy's residence and basically eventually the brothers' hospital. Now, during the rituals, the boy reportedly exhibited various signs of possession, including the bed shaking, objects flying, and speaking in a strange voice. A camera was set up to record the process for documentation purposes. What it captured was beyond disturbing. At 3:14 a.m. on the second night, the boy broke free from his restraints. The tape, viewed by only a handful of people, reportedly shows his body just twisting in impossible angles and a voice deep and layered, unlike any human vocal range, speaking directly into the lens, saying, "He belongs to me." Shortly after, the basement flooded inexplicably. The priest abandoned the church and was later found in a psychiatric hospital, scribbling symbols on the walls. The footage was classified as sacred and never to be viewed by the public, but stills from the tape were allegedly leaked and passed around the dark web under the file name STLE Exorcism 92. Lastly, we have the case of Clara Germaina Seeley. Now, she is said to have been possessed when she was a 16-year-old girl at St. Michael's Mission in Natal, South Africa. She was an orphan of African origin and was baptized as an infant. At the age of 16, the girl allegedly made a pact with Satan, and this is said to be the cause of her demonic possession. Clara later revealed this information to her confessor, Father Harness Aremus. Now, in an account written by a nun, Clara was said to be able to speak languages of which she had no previous knowledge. This fact was also witnessed by others, who recorded that she understood Polish, German, French, Norwegian, and all other languages. Now, the nun reported that Clara demonstrated clairvoyance by revealing the most intimate secrets and transgressions of people with whom she had no contact. Moreover, Clara could not bear the presence of blessed objects and seemed imbued with extraordinary strength and ferocity. Now, often hurling nuns even at the, in the convent rooms and kind of just attacking them. Now, the nun reported that the girl's cries had a savage bestiality that astonished those around her. For 6 years, Clara lived in a demonic possession-free life. Now, she felt ashamed for her behavior, asking for forgiveness while seeking humble pursuits. She passed away in 1912 from heart failure at the young age of 22. However, history had lost track of and forgotten Clara in some versions of her story. First, let's talk about the case of Roland Doe, also known as Robbie Mannheim. Now, in 1949, this 14-year-old boy from Maryland became the inspiration for William Peter Blatty's widely popular novel, The Exorcist. Roland had been experimenting with a Ouija board, trying to contact spirits when he allegedly became possessed by a malevolent entity. Now, the events that followed were nothing short of terrifying. Roland's family reported strange noises, furniture moving on its own, and unexplained events. The boy himself would go into trances, speaking in a very deep, frightening voice and exhibiting supernatural strength. Now, the Catholic Church eventually intervened, performing a series of exorcisms on Roland. The rituals were said to be so intense that they left the boy shaken and traumatized. In mid-1949, several newspaper articles printed anonymous reports of the alleged possession and exorcism. The source for these reports is thought to be the family's former pastor, Luther Miles Schultz, and according to one account, a total of 48 people witnessed this exorcism. According to author Thomas B. Allen, Father Walter was one of the last surviving eyewitnesses of the events and participated in the exorcism. Allen wrote that a diary kept by attending priest Father Raymond J. Bishop detailed the exorcism performed on Roland Doe. Now, speaking in 2013, Allen emphasized that definitive proof that the boy known only as Robbie was possessed by malevolent spirits is unattainable. Now, according to Allen, Halloran also expressed his skepticism about potential paranormal events before his death. When asked in an interview to make a statement verifying that the boy had actually been demonically possessed, Halloran responded saying, "No, I can't go on record. I never made an absolute statement about the things because I didn't feel I was qualified." This exorcism case inspired the novel, which in turn was adapted into the 1973 horror film of the same title, The Exorcist. The case also inspired the 2000 movie, Possessed, which is said to be closer to the story in Allen's book. A documentary was made of the case titled In the Grip of Evil. While the exact details of the events are still disputed, one thing is very clear. Roland's experimentation with spirit summoning had devastating consequences. Another case that comes to mind is that of the Perron family. In January of 1971, Roger and Carolyn Perron moved into a 14-room farmhouse in Rhode Island with their 5 daughters, only to discover that it was haunted by an evil spirit. It started very small. The family reported, all manners of paranormal activity, from unexplained noises and movements to physical attacks. Carolyn would notice that the broom went missing or seemed to move from one place to the next by itself. She could hear the sound of something scraping against the kettle in the kitchen when no one was even in there. She'd find small piles of dirt in the center of a freshly cleaned kitchen. Their daughters would also say that they would notice spirits around the house and that they seemed angry. As the haunting, intensified, the parents sought the help of paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. Now, the Warrens, who were also involved in the Amityville horror case, believed that the spirit was the ghost of a witch who had been slaughtered on the property. The Warrens attempted to perform a cleansing ritual to rid the house of the malevolent entity, but however, the ritual was said to have awakened the spirit instead, making it even more aggressive. Now, the parents eventually fled the house, unable, of course, to cope with the intense paranormal activity. When the movie, The Conjuring, was released in 2013, it was met with critical acclaim. Critics everywhere praised it for its, all too very realistic portrayal of the demonic haunting of the innocent family in Rhode Island. Most viewers assumed that the movie was, nothing but the wild imagination of director James Wan. However, the true story of The Conjuring is actually rooted in the horrifying true experience of Ed and Lorraine Warren. Ed Warren was a World War II veteran and a former police officer who became a self-professed demonologist after studying the subject on his own. His wife Lorraine claimed to be a clairvoyant and medium who was capable of communicating with, the demons that Ed discovered. And in 1952, Ed and Lorraine founded the New England Society for Psychic Research, the oldest ghost hunting group in New England. They quickly gained notoriety notoriety as respected paranormal investigators after their initial investigation of the Amityville hauntings. Although the movies seem, over-dramatized and impossible to believe, the Warrens maintain that all of the events depicted actually transpired. Though Ed passed away sadly in 2006, Lorraine was a consultant on the film and claims that she didn't let the directors take any more dramatic license than was absolutely necessary. Last on my list to talk about is a well-documented case, is that of LaToya Ammons, now an American woman who, along with her 3 children, experienced a series of terrifying paranormal events after conducting a Ouija board seance in their Gary, Indiana home. Shortly after, she began to experience strange occurrences, including hearing strange noises, seeing shadowy figures, and feeling a very intense, unsettling presence. She said she heard footsteps in the basement and doors opening and closing on their own. Desperate for answers, LaToya turned to a Ouija board, hoping to communicate with whatever entity was responsible for the haunting. She gathered her family and conducted a seance, asking, the spirit to reveal itself. According to LaToya, the entity responded, identifying itself as Zozo, a malicious spirit known for its dark and very sinister nature. LaToya and her family were initially, skeptical, of course, but as, the entity began to manifest itself, they realized they had made a very grave mistake. The entity Zozo began to wreak havoc on the family, causing physical attacks, unexplained noises. The family reported finding strange symbols etched into the walls and experiencing very intense, unexplained cold spots throughout the house. As the haunting intensified, LaToya and her family became convinced that they had summoned a very evil spirit and was determined to destroy them. The family reached out to their doctor on April 19, 2012, when he visited the house during, the supposed haunting. He actually noted that their behavior was just delusional. Someone from his office contacted the police and the children were taken to the hospital. The DCS actually initially believed that the children were just performing for their mother. In other words, making it all up for attention. But that wasn't true, and it's even alleged that her 9-year-old son was seen walking backwards up the wall in the presence of a family case manager as well as a hospital nurse. So once that happened, it really debunked that whole theory that they were making it up. The nurse made a statement that said, he walked up the wall, flipped over, and just stood there. There's no way he could have done that. The police captain named Charles Austin said it was the strangest story he ever heard and admitted that at first he thought the family was making it up in an attempt to just make money. But after several visits to their home and interviews with witnesses, he simply said, "I am a believer." Campbell says she remembers telling her daughter, "We need help. We need to talk to someone who knows how to deal with it." And so desperate for help, they turned to a local paranormal investigator who confirmed that the entity was indeed Zozo, a spirit that's known for its very dark and malevolent nature. Now, the family eventually fled their home, unable to cope, of course, with the intense paranormal activity. LaToya has since spoken publicly about her experiences, warning others of the dangers of using Ouija boards and summoning spirits. In 2024, Netflix released a movie called The Deliverance, which is said to be based on this exact case. The movie begins with a title card that reads, "The following story is inspired by true events." So if this has intrigued you, go give that a watch. And in 2014, a man named Zach Bargains actually purchased the house for $35,000 and demolished it in January of 2016 after filming a documentary in it titled The Demon House, which was released in 2018. So that's another one you can go watch.
So, the Reverend Joseph Easterbrook, the Anglican vicar of Temple Church, was summoned on Saturday, the 31st of May of 1778 by a Mrs. Sarah Barber, a woman who was traveling in the village of Yatton Mendip in the county of Somerset. Now, the woman told the pastor that she came across a man by the name of George Lucans, a tailor and common carrier by profession who had a strange sickness, if you will, in which he sang and screamed in various sounds, some of which did not resemble a human voice, and declared that doctors could do him no service. Now, Mrs. Barber attested to the clergyman that George had an extraordinary good character and attended services of worship, where he had received the church sacraments. So, all around a good guy. However, for the past 18 years, he had been subject to a lot of fits, which somebody believed resulted from a supernatural slap, which knocked him down while he was acting in a Christmas pageant of all things. Now, he was consequently taken under the care of Dr. Smith, among many other physicians who really tried to help him, but sadly after his 20-week stay at St. George's Hospital, the medical community there pronounced him incurable. Now, members of the community began to think that he was bewitched, and he himself declared that he was possessed by 7 demons, who could only be driven out by, well, 7 clergymen. So Reverend Joseph Easterbrook contacted Methodist ministers in connection with all of this, who agreed to pray for George. Now, we do have a quote from one of the reverends involved in the exorcisms, a Reverend John Valton. He said that some time ago I had a letter requesting me to make one of these 7 ministers to pray over George. I cried out before God, Lord, I am not fit for such a work. I have not faith to encounter a demon. It was powerfully applied. God in thy might. The day before we were to meet, I went to see George and found such faith that I could then encounter the 7 devils which he said tormented him. I did not doubt, but deliverance would come. Suffice to say, when we met, the Lord heard prayer and delivered the poor man. So an account of the exorcism was actually published in the Bristol Gazette. The newspaper reported that George, during his possession, claimed he was the devil, made barking noises, sung an inverted song, and was just overall very violent. And in light of these claims, on Friday the 13th of June of 1778, 7 clergymen, including the Reverend Joseph Easterbrook, accompanied George to the vestry at Temple Church, where they performed an exorcism on the man, which included hymn singing, prayer, all the usual stuff. The deliverance concluded when the demons were allegedly cast out using the Trinitarian formula. The clergyman commanded the demons to return to hell, and George then exclaimed, "Blessed Jesus," praised God, recited the Lord's Prayer, and then thanked the clergyman. Now, Reverend Easterbrook, when recording the events under the patronage of John Wellesley, stated that the account would be doubted in this modern era of skepticism, but pointed to the scriptures and other authentic history of ancient as well as modern times to really explain what he felt was a valid case of demonic possession. Once again, after the exorcism, George was calm and happy. Now, following this case, several pieces of literature were printed on this entire situation, thus popularizing this case of diabolical possession, despite the original plans to keep it kind of quiet, for George's sake. In the spring of 1842, Pastor Johan Kristoff Blumhardt was advised by his parishioners to investigate the strange goings-on at the home of the Dittis siblings. Orphaned and bereaved of several other siblings as well, 4 of them, Gottlieben, Anna Maria, Katharina, and another, lived together in a tumble-down house under the conditions of extreme poverty. But that wasn't the primary target of concern. It was the noises, the strange lights, and above all, the strange behavior of, I'm going to call her G, that called for further examination. Now, when he arrived at the place, G didn't really respond warmly to the pastor's friendly overtures. He let her be, but then neighbors were still complaining. She fell down, she fell ill, the noises in the house were so loud they kept them up at night. So Johan told the siblings to stay with a relative overnight, while he and trusted members of the congregation searched the house. And that's where they found a lot of weird stuff, and his fears were confirmed. They found evidence of dabbling in occult magic, and oh bother. Now, further inquiry revealed that G's early life had been filled with attempted initiations into such dark traffic at, well, why? Her elders did it. Spiritualist studies weren't really unknown at the time, and reputable figures investigated a lot of reports of poltergeists, conversations with the dead, spirits of all kinds. It's kind of commonplace. Johan was, determined. He decided to try and pray and place his trust in the Lord. But things didn't get better for G. If anything, they got worse, especially when Johan came near. She fainted, she shook, she foamed at the mouth in delirious fits, then she would come to and appear and, well, be sane, I guess, for all intents and purposes. Johan eventually became convinced that whatever was at work was in fact the devil, or a devilish spirit. One night in late June, G once again fell into a trance. Now this time, Johan grabbed her hand, shouted into her ear, "Place your hands together and pray. Lord Jesus, help me. We have seen long enough what the devil can do. Now we desire to see also what Jesus can do." And somehow, G regained consciousness, joined the pastor in prayer, and settled down again. And from then on, Johan's strategy didn't vary. He kept her company. He prayed with her. He invited her to pray as well. The prayers were simple and spontaneous. If the spirits tried to talk to Johan, he told them to keep silent. If they refused, he left. But here's the thing. G continued to suffer attacks, and they increased in scale and severity. She pummeled herself, yanked out her own hair, spat as if trying to purge from within, lost weight to a dangerous degree. It got really bad. She would hemorrhage. and she would attribute the wounds to spirits. Almost a year after the pastor's first visit, she began to upchuck objects. We're talking sand, nails, shoelaces, pins, and then they came out through her skin, but they would leave no wound. By Christmas of 1843, this struggle had lasted for almost 2 years, and by the end of that year, G wasn't the only one dealing with demonic harm. Her sister, Katarina, her brother, all struggling as well. As usual, Johan went to sit with them. He prayed with them and for them. Katarina was in such a state that she was trying to tear herself to pieces. But then, at about 2 in the morning, she let a loud noise, loud enough to shake the house, doubled over backward, and then shouted, "Jesus is victor!" And so he was. Somehow, the evil spirits were defeated. With that cry of defeat and, well, joy I suppose, the demons were broken, as were the spell that had been held over the entire family. All the alarming manifestations stopped, and G and her sisters and brothers were back to being themselves again. So the next story. The whispers started in April of 2003 in the mind of this 23-year-old nun. In the heart of an Orthodox convent in Romania's impoverished northeast, doctors say Marisisia Irina Cornici believed she heard the devil talking to her, telling her she was sinful. Now, originally she was treated for schizophrenia, but when she relapsed, a monk and 4 nuns tried a different method, exorcism. Now, in order to restrain her from violent movements, including those causing her to harm herself, the nuns bound her hand and feet and locked her in her room as they participated in the liturgy commemorating the ascension of Jesus. A few days later, they chained her to a cross with her arms stretched out and carried her into the church so that they could anoint her. Well, by the way, on top of this bad stuff earlier, she was gagged with a towel and left in a really dank room at the convent for 3 days without food, where, well, she died of dehydration. So originally, when she was moved to her room, she was untied and she was cured. She was given bread and tea, but when she fainted after eating, the nuns couldn't awaken her, and when they felt that her pulse was weak, they called an ambulance. Well, in the ambulance, she was given about 6 doses of adrenaline, so by the time she reached the hospital, she was gone from us. The police were notified by the doctors at the hospital, who noticed the marks that were left from all the restraining. The autopsy claimed that she had passed from dehydration, exhaustion, and a lack of oxygen. Now, the father and the 4 nuns who had helped with this exorcism were charged with death and depriving a person of liberty. Prosecutors sought a life sentence for the priest, but he was sentenced in 2007 to 14 years in prison, while the nuns got 5 to 8 years. So next up, this rare and disturbing footage has been released of a woman writhing around on the floor and screaming as an exorcism is performed on her over in Argentina. The 22-year-old woman, identified only by her first name Laura, is pinned to the ground as Bishop Manuel Acuna drives the evil spirits out of her. As she screams "no, no" and spits some really bad words out at one of the women holding her, the bishop is heard muttering, leave her now." Now, before the exorcism, locals gathered at the church in Buenos Aires, praying for her soul and redemption. The bishop told them the demon exists. Laura was then led into a chamber where church helpers held her to the ground. Local man Augustus Amador Arevalo, who had gone to pray for her, said, "We could hear her screaming and crying as we prayed for her deliverance." Apparently she was like a good person, but when the devil possessed her, yikes. She had to be exorcised. She had to be set free. The exorcism came to an end as she suddenly gave out a really weird cry and then closes her eyes, falls backwards, exhausted, wiping away tears as the priest once again made the sign of the cross over her body. And the bishop said she was good. He said, "Thank God, we've recovered a daughter of God." And finally for today, back in the 1970s, Michael Taylor was kind of an ordinary guy over in Yorkshire. He, his wife Christine, their offspring, and their pet poodle lived really happy lives. And now we're gonna pop that bubble. In 1974, Christine stated to a Christian fellowship group, to which they both belonged, that his relationship with the leader of the group, Marie Robinson, was carnal in nature. Michael admitted that he felt evil within him, and eventually attacked Marie verbally, who screamed back at him. Marie said that his eyes began to change to something bestial, and then he started to speak in tongues. Michael had no memory of the event, something all too common in cases of possession. Now, during the next meeting, he received an absolution, but his behavior continued to become more erratic. So as a result, the local vicar called in other ministers, experienced in deliverance in preparation to cast out the demons residing within the man. Now, this exorcism, which occurred between the 5th and 6th of October of 1974 at St. Thomas's Church in Gobber, was led by Father Peter Vincent, who was the Anglican priest of St. Thomas's, and was helped out by a Methodist clergyman, the Reverend Raymond Smith. Over the next 8 hours, Michael would repeatedly have crucifixes stuffed inside of his mouth while being doused with holy water. Now, according to Bill Ellis, an authority on folklore and the occult in contemporary culture, the exorcists believed that they had, in an all-night ceremony, invoked and cast out at least 40 demons, including those of, well, some really bad stuff, blasphemy, bestiality, and lewdness. In the end, exhausted, they allowed Taylor to go home, but they were like, I think he still has some demons. Well, Go figure. While at home, he brutally ended the life of his wife, Christine, by attacking her with his bare hands, tearing some body parts out, and almost tearing her face off. He was eventually found by a policeman, completely nude in the street and covered in red fluid. Well, at his trial, he was acquitted on the grounds of insanity and was sent to the Broadmoor Hospital for 2 years, then spent another 2 years in a secure ward in Bradford before being released.